What is up, everybody? Welcome to the first live edition of 4th and 15 with Mel and Smooth. I am Mel. Joining me, as always, is Ronnie Big Smooth Hennigan. Smooth, what's up?
Not much, Mel. How you doing?
Man, you saw the day I was having. All right. While we got time, we have a very special guest with us. From famed Mortal Kombat, WMAC Masters, and the movie Blood Moon, we have Master Hakim Alston joining us. How you doing,
It's a
sir?
pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for joining us, man. This is definitely an honor, and I'm gonna try my best not to be all starstruck and stuff. You know what I mean, man? This is huge for me. So I'm gonna
Well,
just
like I said before, I said, listen, guys. I mean, we all have our, history, and we all have, our so-called legacy that we're building. But
yes, sir.
at the end of the day, we are simply brothers. And to be humble and understand that, appreciate the good, admire some of the work that other individuals have done, but at the same time, understand that it is about your path and your march and what you do. And if you kind of grasp that and understand that you want to surround yourself with people that are propelling you forward, then it all makes sense. So again,
So
I'm humble.
tell us. I appreciate it. Appreciate it very much. So tell us, when did you get into martial arts? Because for most of us, it started at a young age, and it grew, progressed, or they just never left the world of martial arts. How did you come across martial arts?
You know what? I'm going to wrap up a long story and make it short. It was when I was roughly about 11. No, I'm sorry, I was about 10 years old. When my mother decided that football was not something that she wanted us to do. We were basically, gung ho into that at the time as our sport of choice. And simply, my mom said, "Listen, we're not going that direction." So we got picked up one. We were actually outside playing in the snow one winter. My sister picked us up, drove us to a junior karate school in Kensington, Maryland. Um, we had about 15 layers of clothes, I believe, one at the time. And walking in the studio, we were, and I'll be completely honest, I wasn't impressed. I was a little kid. I was like, what are we doing here? I'm seeing these people walking around in these pajama-like things and, doing whatever they were doing. And my only exposure to the arts at that time was Bruce Lee and Enter the Dragon and a couple other films. But after taking the first class, and my original instructor was Master Jeff Smith, and with Danny Bacagno. And after taking that first class, I was hooked. That was it. I mean, and from that moment forward, I mean, people talking about putting in the work. Myself and my younger brother Shaw practically lived at the karate school at that point. I mean, we were there 6 days a week. From the moment we finished our homework until like 9 o'clock at night, many nights. So it was just one of those things we gravitated towards really quickly. And fortunately, we were surrounded by a good nucleus of teachers and instructors that guided us and really kind of mentored us and put us in a good path.
And from there, you got into, well, can't say you got into movies, but before that, you hit the U.S. karate team. How did that come about?
It's one of those things. I mean, at a very young age, I mean, from the age of 13 years old, um, because of my size, I was fighting literally in the men's division on the point circuit. We're talking like the Battle of Atlanta, NASCAR circuit, and et cetera. And one of the coaches that was at the time was actually scouting for the junior team. And he came up to me and said, "Hey, listen, would you be interested in coming to the tryouts?" And I think it was out in Denver at the time. And he really impressed my parents. Let me be honest, because I was young at the time. And at that point, I mean, we said, "I'm extremely interested." Went to the junior tryouts. and by far, it was one of those experiences where the coaches were like, okay, this cat is, we need to kind of accelerate and push this guy fast. Because the juniors is not where he should be. Let's see if we can qualify him for a alternate for the senior team. And again, you got to realize I was about, at that time, about like 15 or 16, 15 going on 16 years old. And real quickly, I mean, they invited me on a couple of the travels with the team to, I think we went to Yugoslavia, and then we went to, I believe it was Turkey. No, I'm sorry. We went to Yugoslavia, and I think it was Turkey. I could be wrong. But anyway, I went there and ended up competing and won my division at the time. And one of the international coaches then said, hey, listen, we'd love to have this guy come back, compete in some of our international events. And one thing that's kind of led to the other. And one of the, I'll say this in one of the folklore, I guess, stories, for lack of a better term. When I competed at one of the world championships, I think it was 18 or 19 at the time, one of the, the Japanese officials, judges at the time, because you realize the only people that were before us that really made some noise was Billy Blanks at the time on the national, on the world tour, on the world stage, and Toki Hill. And this young kid comes up, and we're over in Australia, and I'm fighting, and we did the team competition, and I was just, I tell you like that, I was just in one of those zones where everything that I did, it was just freaking popping at the time, and yeah, it started to get a little groundswell. So, and of course, I was a cocky kid, where I was like, I'm piss and vinegar, man. I'm doing whatever I wanted to do at the time. And the attitudes did not rub the Japanese officials too kindly. And I'd be nice when I say that. And then they had warned the U.S. coaches. They said, listen, you need to kind of check your teammate here, or check one of your members, and tell him to kind of tone it down a bit. So long story short, I'm fighting the very next day because we had actually won the team competition. And we were fighting the very next day when I was fighting in, at that time, the light heavyweight division. And I was just, again, I was lighting fools up. And it was one of the things, I was fighting one of the previous year's champion, I think the world champion from the previous year, I believe. He was from France. And literally, I did this one move where the guy came in, I swept his leg, punched him midair, the crowd went crazy, and I just stood over top of him, raised my hands. They stopped the entire tournament. Went over to the coaches, told me to basically to turn around and basically not face them at the time. And then they stopped my entire division. They said, okay, this guy was randomly selected for a drug test. At that point, I was adamant. I was like, you got to be joking me. We had already went through these tests and everything. You're not going to stop me in the middle of a freaking division and tell me I have to do a drug test? And the coach was like, listen, Hakim, you got to do the drug test. And they forced me to do the drug test. Did it. Long story short, came back the next day because it took 24 hours to process. Ended up fighting in the gold medal round. I'm fighting one of the guys, and they said, listen, if you do anything else unsportsmanlike, we're going to disqualify you from the tournament. I did basically one move where I did a punch, and you can't like raise your hands and do that kind of stuff, and then on the international circuit at the time. So I just hit the guy, and I just stood there. I did my yell, just stood there. They came, talked to my coaches, and they were like, listen, your guy's been disqualified. And we went back and forth, and fortunately, my coaches were able to muster up enough political sway to get them to kind of forgive that so-called move. So I had to kind of keep myself in check. End up going on from that point, won the championship. And I had a very sour taste in my mouth at that point because the coaches were really coming down on me hard, telling me basically don't do this. And again, I'm a young kid thinking, I can do anything I wanted. And I kind of soured with some of the coaches at the time because I didn't think they had my back. I knew I already had invitations to their international championships, later on that month. And I had the fortunate circumstances to have a gentleman by the name of Thomas LaPuppet, who basically was a mentor at the time, who was able to kind of corral me, get me to, kind of just, tone it down just a bit, understanding that there's a bigger play other than just myself. We're representing the country. We're doing things that we have to kind of grow up and understand that, you're not an 18-year-old kid, even though you really are. You're representing much more. And then that was one of those turning points where I actually started to look in the mirror, start to check myself and understand that there was a bigger play in front other than just me. So no, it's a long story, so forgive me.
Man, look, we actually enjoy those kind of stories because you learn a lot about somebody through the stories. It's not always, story that you see, it's the story that you don't hear that's more interesting. Now, you're in competition and you're rising up the ranks. Now, this picture, I don't know if you could see that. You're doing kickboxing, I believe, and you've got 3 belts at that point. How did you get into kickboxing? Was it easy for you? And was it a change from the circuits at that time?
The answer is yes and yes. It was for me, a very natural progression. And I think that, and I want to say this, and hopefully the tone of what I say is going to be conveyed correctly. When I was on the national circuit and when I was winning, and basically the #1 point fighter in the nation and all that kind of stuff, it was one of those things where you get to a certain point and you understand as a competitor, you have to be motivated, you have to be driven, you have to, in order to stay at a certain level, you have to find the motivational tools and the targets to really to kind of guide you, to keep you in front of the next guy who's sniffing at your heels. But I also realized that for me, it's almost like, and let me digress for 2 seconds. When you set your goals that are somehow, and I say this lightly, misguided, or at least not solid enough in depth, that when you get there, you realize it's not what you thought it was. And so when I got to the point where the stories that were written about me at the time, it was no longer about me winning. It was about, who's going to knock me off, or about if I stumbled or if I happened to not perform at a certain level. Those became the stories, and I became a little disenchanted with how that coverage affected me as a person and as a competitor. So I said, listen, I have to find another motivation that's going to drive me versus to win and not to lose, if you guys understand what I'm saying. So in moving to the kickboxing, I actually started working with Danny Bacagno and some of the other kickboxers at the time, Michael Coles. And they were, again, it was something that was a very natural progression, because a lot of the way we trained, even though I was on the tournament circuit, was very continuous in fighting and very full contact in kickboxing in its nature. And I say this, and if you guys, again, are with me on this, you understand that, if you are a warrior and you are in competition, and that element of me mano a mano is something that is part of your lifeblood, you understand that, as a competitor, and getting out there and challenging yourself and being in front of someone and proving your dominance is something that also was a natural play for me to kind of pull that into the kickboxing arena. So I mean, I did that, do the ranks, and I was moving relatively quickly, and it was kind of like on the hills. And I'm going to preference what I'm saying, because timing, of course, means everything, and not everything, but it has a lot to do with how you kind of choose a path sometimes. And the timing of the kickboxing things was also happening right around the same time that the television things were starting to happen, and some of the roles that were being offered to me were starting to happen. Um, so it was one of the it was a kind of a meteoric rise with regards to me kind of chopping down some of the competition, and knock on wood, they God, he blessed me to have the physical and mental kind of acumen to achieve the levels I did. Um, and I was able to do it in a very short amount of time in regards to winning the U.S. title and then winning the world title. And that was something that happened. Then I had a choice to make. I was either going to continue to defend the title at the time, or at that point, it was, I had another season that we were doing with WMAC Masters, and then my manager at the time, which was Writers and Artists, and I'm sorry, my agent at the time, was like, listen, we got to get you out to California. We have a lot of buzz about you, bro, and we need to start pursuing some of these things. So and sitting down with my manager, sitting down with my trainers, sitting down with my coaches, we made a decision. And that kind of even though the rise was there, and I'm a fighter by nature, and I never looked at myself ever as a actor. Um, I just happened to be a fighter who happened to be in movies. Um, so it was just one of those natural plays that happened after sitting down with the coaches and trainers that allowed me to kind of move on to the next chapter. If that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, it does make a lot of sense. From kickboxing, you win the world title, you win the U.S. title, and you mentioned WMAC Masters. How did you get into the role of the Machine when they gave you the spot on WMAC Masters?
Um, Let me kind of explain the evolution of masters to a degree. And I want to say this, or preference that, or this by saying that um, this was a show that was in development for a relatively long period of time. And what they were doing, they were grooming, they were actually going out and looking for the right characters, looking for the right kind of mix of cast to put this together. So when Pat Johnson, who again I do regard Pat as a mentor, because again he kind of pulled me aside when I was a competitor, and he was always a very supportive mentor. And he kind of said, "Listen, I want you to be a part of this project. This is where we're going to go with this. We're going to center a lot of this stuff around your character, um, and we want you to start to kind of tool up. When he says tool up, I want you to be ready." So again, I kind of when that conversation first happened, I took it with a grain of salt. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And after I guess maybe about a year or so, I mean, things start to move at a relatively quick pace. And this was again right around that same time that I just referenced earlier with the kickboxing, the end of doing my point fighting and all that kind of stuff. So I believe, and I'm going to date myself. I want to say this was around the 93 time, right around 92, 93. I want to say right around that timeline. And anyway, to answer your question, when they brought us in, they brought the initial cast of characters and martial artists. And this was myself, this was Chris, and this was Herb. This was, believe it or not, they had Taimak, who was there, and who else? I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry, Hosong and his brother, the Park brothers. So they brought us in and they set us down and they said, listen, we want to develop basically characters for you guys. So they gave us basically a list of different characters that they were looking for us to kind of assume the roles. And everyone else had one or two different type of characters that they could choose from. I had only one. I mean, they said, listen, we already know what you're going to play. You have a machine. That's it. End of story. Pat says, listen, this is it, bro. We want you to assume this identity, and because we're developing a lot of the storyline for the first season around your character, and that's it. So it was not. I didn't really have a choice. They asked me for a couple of suggestions. I mean, I said, listen, I love it. It goes with the name. It matches. It matches what I'm trying to do. I read the first script. That was it.
That is
And
awesome.
through it
That
all,
was growing up as a kid. Go ahead, Ronnie.
I can't
oh
hear you.
no,
Go
you
ahead.
good. Through it all, Hakeem, I'd have to ask you too, like with your involvement, not just with the films and with, what you were able to accomplish through, kickboxing and also with the U.S. karate team. Um, Through it all, do you feel that you've accomplished all that you could, or is there still more for Hakeem to do?
I mean, look, you already know the answer to that before I open my mouth. Of course, I mean, as long as I have breath, there's always going to be more. You have to evolve. You have to adapt. You have to understand that there's always unwritten chapters that are in front of you. You have to be able to acknowledge, recognize, pursue, and take advantage. So, I mean, and also you have to kind of look at, you're kind of like the scenarios in front of you and you make decisions. And I'm going to, again, kind of give you guys some insight on certain things that happened that actually caused me to make certain decisions that gave, that basically guided and pulled me to where I am today. I mean, one of those decisions were that when I was, again, this is right around the 90, I want to say 95. This is like right after we had filmed Mortal Kombat at the time. We just finished that. I think it was just released. There was a tremendous, there was a buzz. I mean, I was meeting, with people at Warner Brothers Studios, with New Line Studios. A little quick tidbit. I mean, Spawn was a role that I was up for. There was another where I sat down with Silverman, and they were looking to do the movie Shaka Zulu at the time. And they were looking to do basically a three-picture kind of deal dealing with Shaka Zulu, and a spin-off of that character and some other stuff. And then they had Afro Samurai and some other stuff that they were contemplating. And we sat down, and Larry Kennard, who was my agent at the time, said, "Hey, listen, you're going to have to make a decision here because we need you out in LA. And you got to realize I'm doing all of this while I'm still living on the East Coast in Virginia. And I just had my second child, Tatiana, and I sat down with my wife and I said, listen, we're going to have to kind of make a decision here. I know you're not a proponent or a fan of Los Angeles or California, but look, I need to kind of be out there for the various reasons. So we went back and forth. I sat down with my agent, sat down with the manager, sat down with even Pat Johnson at the time, and went over some of the different scenarios. I had already signed with Writers and Artists. I had signed on to do Shaka Zulu. The project was still being waiting to be greenlit. It never did get greenlit, by the way. But they were, so I sat down with them and I said, listen, my family, I don't want to move my family to LA. I said, but whatever we need to do, I can always, commute, whatever it is, it is what it is. So at the time, um, Larry was like, okay, fine. We're going to be, once they get the approval, we're going to be filming, Shaka Zulu. I think it was in the fall or spring of '96 is when it was slated to go. And then in the meantime, I was doing, I think, the Red Trousers with Robin Shu. So I was going over to Hong Kong to do that. And long story short, one of the projects, Shaka Zulu, got shelved. It got paused. And when it got paused, I was like, okay, listen, guys, what's up? Blah, blah, blah. They're like, Hakim, look, we got other projects. And then they ended up turning down a lot of projects because Shaka Zulu was kind of like one of those launching vehicles. It was a big project. It was, it was a $100 million project that they were putting on the slate. And this was supposed to be kind of that vehicle that launched me to the next level. That got put on hold. And while that was on hold, I had an opportunity, financially, for some businesses that that I was going to dive into, that were in front of me that I was going to dive into. So I ended up diving into one of those businesses dealing with the financial sector, and that took off freaking like wildfire. And then when it came down to doing some of these smaller projects, I was like, can't do it. I mean, I feel you, but I'm right now, I'm starting to make some moves, and this is where I'm at. So long story short, I ended up taking that right turn as a decision to kind of pull myself away from that, not really pursue the film and television as much, even with some of the offers that were out there. And to be honest with you, I don't regret it, not one bit.
Brought you to where you are. That we can't nobody tell you different. You mentioned Mortal Kombat.
Mm-hmm.
You, Chris Casamassa, and a few others were involved in the fight choreography and some actual scenes. I believe Chris Casamassa was Scorpion or Sub-Zero.
Correct. Yes.
Scorpion. What was shooting like for you? Okay, yeah, I thought so. What was shooting like for you during the day? I mean, you're surrounded by martial artists. You're surrounded by martial artists. Did that make the environment more fun? Or was it tough long scenes? What was the atmosphere like?
The atmosphere for the first Mortal Kombat was electric. And I say that in the sense that everyone on set knew that they were part of something. Everyone on set, even though we were, tight-lipped and we couldn't talk about the production piece or what we were doing, everyone knew what we were embarking on. It was kind of the Enter the Dragon of our time. We knew that. We knew that going into it. Pat knew that. Paul knew that. Chris knew that. All the people, knew what we were doing. So there was a sense of, look, let's bring it every freaking day. Let's just bring it. And this goes back to the stunt guys who were doing it, putting in the work, to the cast members, to to the directors and etc. We were over, like I said, we did some of the filming in LA, and then of course we were over in Phuket, over in Thailand, doing a lot of the shooting as well. I mean, so the fight scene that I did with Robin was filmed on the beach of down in Phuket, which was absolutely a beautiful, breathtaking set to work on. Phuket, basically props to Phuket. I mean, if you guys have been, make sure that you guys make that a point to kind of check that off your list. So anyway, I mean, the understanding that, and one of the interesting stories about my scene is that we were the day before I was to film the first scene, or the fight scene with Robin. I was actually on a motorcycle, and I was following the cast bus, and we were going to basically do some scouting. I was and Chris was doing one of his fight scenes, in one of the bamboo jungles. So I'm on the I'm on the motorcycle, and we're coming around the curl, coming around this turn, and my motorcycle spun out,
Mm.
and it hit an oil slick, spun out, and I put my hand down on the ground to try to keep my body off of the ground as my motorcycle started to spin, and just totally shredded every piece of, just the layer of skin off of my left hand. Um, and the first of all, the director, everybody's freaking out. They're like, "Holy crap!" I mean, you're filming tomorrow, and my hand is totally shit. It's done. It's crushed. When I say crushed, I'm just talking about just skinned. So we spent the next probably with the medics and with the makeup people and everything else, uh, probably 12 hours trying to figure something out, trying to do a pain management thing on how we're going to manage the pain, how we're going to cover it up. Because again, the first part of the fight scene I'm doing with the bow staff. So I have to have my hands around something, and I have to be able to do this without any semblance of hesitation. Um, so we ended up, basically just biting down and saying, listen, just give me some new skin to spray that bad boy out. They sprayed it up layer after layer with new skin as much as they could. They ended up actually putting the stocking over the hand and then trying to find a way to put some padding underneath that. That didn't work. So we went through a few different scenarios. At the end of the day, and this goes back to the original answer that I gave you, at the end of the day, it was just like, F it, let's go. I'll deal with the pain later. Let's go. Let's rock this bad boy out. So raw skin and all, we just said let's boogie down, let's roll with it, and that was it. So I mean, it was a beautiful project that I worked on. One of the most positive projects from heel to toe that I was involved with. So that was it.
Man, hats off to you for doing that, because I know for me, like the things that I've experienced over the years and the pain I've been in, suffering injuries and whatnot. I mean, that's some mind over matter type stuff right there. I don't know if I could have done something like that personally, but like you said, when it's go time, it's go time.
Yeah.
Adrenaline is a very powerful thing, and I feel like